what is this photo of here?
This is one of the megalithic sites in Peru called Ollantaytambo, and it's an example of some of the workmanship in granite that the famous Inca could not have made this because they only had bronze tools, and that's kind of what ties Egypt in with Peru is that, of course, Egyptologists will say that everything in Egypt was done by the dynastic Egyptians, who were a Bronze Age culture, and everything in Peru that's of stone like this was done by the Inca, but clearly that's not possible, so we're looking at structures that are far, far older than the Inca, and in Egypt far, far older than the dynastic Egyptians.
Right. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I imagine there are other places in the Inca. In other words, you're showing this one, but there are more, right? That would.
Oh, yeah. No, many more. This is a site called Cutimbo, which is in the highlands of Peru, and they're described by archaeologists as being funeral towers. But again, the workmanship is so tight-fitting of this hard stone, it's more likely that the Inca who arrived in the area 1,000 years ago probably discovered them there, and they may have used them as tombs, but whoever made them originally had much higher levels of technology. We did have a number of dowsers at this site, and they felt very strong energy lines relating to these towers.
Right. Well, are you even convinced they're tombs?
No, I think they were built as energetic structures originally, and whoever built them disappeared, and then later the Inca probably may have used them as tombs because they are hollow on the inside, and some of a royal lineage may have said, "I like that stone tower. When I die, bury me inside of it." Sort of like Khufu.
Right. Okay. Putting on this H construction type of structure, this is a very interesting shape that recurs, from what I understand, at many ancient sites, not just in South America.
Yeah, well, this is the famous Pumapunku, which is part of the Tiwanaku complex in Bolivia. And again, the archaeologists say that a Bronze Age culture did this workmanship, but engineers who I've taken to the site and looked at it say that this is at least 21st century, if not beyond 21st century technology. So there's no way that the native people of 1,000 years ago made these things. They simply found them in place.
Okay. Is there any dating going on? Any ability to date these things?
It is possible. There's a new process called cosmogenic dating or testing, which measures the amount of cosmic radiation that has penetrated the stone. And so we're hoping to be able to begin doing testing of stone from some of these sites in the future with a laboratory in the U.S.
That would be amazing. Okay, I have, this is, isn't this an Olmec? This next photograph that I'm going to put on the screen here. Isn't that an Olmec?
Yeah, that's, I haven't been to Olmec country yet, and I'm going with Hugh Newman in February on a tour. So we're going to be exploring the lands of the Aztec, the Toltec, the Olmec, and the Maya. And, of course, there are examples of these in the museum in Mexico City, but it'll be much more interesting to see them at their original locations.
Absolutely, and they call that the jaguar mouth. Are you aware of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wrote a song a long time ago that we use as the Camelot theme called Jaguar, and they say the jaguar is the door into the other dimensions, and the fact that they call this the jaguar mouth and when it's on these beings is quite interesting, and you could extrapolate that the beings that are being depicted came from another dimension.
Well, of course, some people believe that that these may have been part African people or part Chinese people or whatever. The fascinating thing I find about the Olmec is that there's so little that's known about them. So much more is known about the later Maya culture. It's believed by some as well that the famous Mayan calendar was actually the Olmec's calendar that the Maya inherited. But the Olmec seem to appear from nowhere and then disappear, and
Yes.
that's why they fascinate me, because it's the same with the Paracas culture. The Paracas suddenly appear on the coast of Peru 3,000 years ago and then disappear 2,000 years ago, and archaeologists have no explanation. So it's my quest to find the answers to this stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I've always found the Olmecs to be a fascinating culture, and for what it's worth, I think it looks like he's got a helmet on, and that kind of indicates some kind of space travel. There is, I understand that sort of traditional archaeologists will refer to this as a combination of the Oriental cultures and also possibly African cultures, but it doesn't seem to fit either of those molds. I can say that they do have a few of these in a museum here in Los Angeles. I think it's the County Museum had a show and had some of these type of carving skulls, whatever you want to call them. And the energy off them is extraordinary. For what it's worth, and that's really interesting when you can take something from a site, move it, into North America, so you're thousands of miles away, and it still retains that energetic around it like an aura. That's a testimony to something going on with that particular sort of carving, if you will. Do you do anything like that? Do you measure, I don't know, energetics around some of these ancient sites, the vortex ley lines? Do you look into the sound, for example, and things to do with sound?
Yeah, that's definitely what we're starting to get into, because it seems that the megalithic sites themselves, the reason for the stones fitting so tightly together isn't simply earthquake proofing, as some people say. It seems that they were definitely tuning these structures to respond to specific frequencies. And again, that's not necessarily something that that the known cultures would have done. It's something that is absolutely fascinating. And of course, you've been in Egypt, so the sound resonance inside places such as the King's Chamber, seem to definitely to have been tuned to specific frequencies for some reason. So that's the next level of study that we're getting into.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Fascinating group of photographs. So that's great, and thank you. And would like to ask you, just in terms of where you are going lately, are you feeling like your perception of even maybe what you've set out to do, like I don't know if you call it a mission, but your mission, do you feel that mission parameters have changed as a result of some of the places you've been lately?
Definitely, they're expanding a lot. There's the scientific approach, the archaeological approach, but there's also the psychic approach, the intuitive approach, and when you combine them all together, you find a much more fascinating story than something which is relatively dry, as in archaeology. Some archaeologists have a tendency to have answers to questions or enigmas that really don't make any sense whatsoever, and so that's why it's a lot of fun to have people who know how to dowse or who are psychic in nature to come with us on our tours, because they give us impressions that are not in archaeological texts. And so it's trying to look at the bigger picture, These megalithic sites are far more complicated than most of us realize, and probably much older than we believe they are.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you're going to consider, or going around and touring with Hugh Newman and Andrew Collins. I think that's fascinating when a group of researchers gets together to go to these sites, because then you can, compare notes and really look at the sites with different points of view, and then share those points of view with each other. Do you have any idea of doing your own tours in this way?
Well, my wife and I have been doing we do a number of tours every year in Peru and Bolivia, but it's a lot more fun to interact with other researchers in the field, and the guests that come along with us really love that, because when you're able to interact at these ancient sites, and you get different viewpoints, and it's up to the people who come with us to take from each of us what they want. That's why we also go to Egypt once a year, and we have the Kemet School, who are our hosts, and also Stephen Mailer, who is a major authority on ancient Egypt, as well as the geologist that comes with us. And so it's our field discussions that are really a lot of fun, because we always discover new things that we hadn't seen or interpreted before.
Right. So it's sort of happening in front of your eyes, and you're commenting and having your own experiences, I guess, having the impact and being able to share that. I had a bit of that when I took Michael Tellinger and Hugh Newman and Rebecca Jernigan to Egypt in 2012. So the group of us were all experiencing Egypt from our particular points of view and sharing that. And that was a lot of fun and really fascinating. So I encourage people that, when that's an opportunity, it's a great way to learn about places. And I've done that on other tours. I'd love to join you on a tour sometime. And, I still haven't been to South America, to Peru or, Machu Picchu and all of that. And certainly there are other places, I guess, to go to, obviously, see the skulls, go to your museum, all of that.
Sure.
So that would be amazing. Have you had any further sort of investigation in Egypt? Because I know you went there fairly recently, and I was wondering what new things you're sort of discovering, or maybe rethinking various ideas that you might have had.
Yeah, well, actually in March was my third annual trip. We're going back in April with the Kemet School again. And what we seem to be discovering is that there's much more underground than most Egyptologists will expose. There's a whole system of tunnels underneath the Giza Plateau that extend for miles, that connect some of the ancient pyramids with each other, like the ones in Dashur seem to be connected with Giza. There's, of course, the Serapeum, which I'm not sure if you've been in, but it contains 25 100-ton stone boxes, which cannot be explained properly by Egyptologists. And even Zahi Hawass, the infamous head of Egyptian antiquities, admitted that 85% of ancient Egypt is still buried under the sand to be discovered, and I think we're looking at definite evidence of a super advanced ancient culture that existed, and that many of these structures that are above ground and even below ground were simply inherited by the dynastic Egyptians. They had nothing to do with their construction whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a really interesting line of inquiry. Excuse me. So I wanted to respond to the seraphim. Actually, I haven't been inside it, and that would be fascinating. I would love to do that. That area is amazing, and I don't know. Did you have more information about that particular site?
Well, it's almost from a science fiction film, to be honest, because you descend down into the bedrock, into this tunnel, and turn left and follow the tunnel, and then there's this massive long tunnel, especially to the right, and inside, to the left and right, are these niches that contain these giant stone boxes. One in each. The lid of each box weighs an estimated 20 to 30 tons, and the boxes themselves weigh 60 or 70 tons. And modern engineers can't explain how they could make them to this very day. We've had a number of engineers look at them and they say, we don't have the technology to do that now. So how could the dynastic Egyptians have done them? They couldn't have.
Obviously, there's so many things like that in, when you get into investigating the ancient world. How long ago were was the seraphim open to the public? Do you know?
Yeah, I think it was September of either 2012 or 2013. It had been closed for many years because it's a tunnel system, they were afraid that falling rocks would knock tourists on the head and kill them or have them sue them. So they finally reinforced parts of the interior, and now it's open to the public. It's at the Saqqara site, and it's one of the most fascinating things you will ever see in your life.
Absolutely, I wouldn't be a bit surprised, and I'm sort of sneaking a look at a video on the side here while you're talking about it, because I wanted to see if I was right about what I thought about it. The above ground site is also extraordinary. Architecturally, it doesn't resemble anything else, in my opinion, in Egypt. Have you seen any other site that looks even remotely like that?
No, it's the thing that we're discovering is that a lot of the tunnels, like probably in the Valley of the Kings and Valley of the Queens, those deep tunnels and shafts which were turned into tombs were likely discovered by the dynastic Egyptians, and then they utilized them as tombs, and they put all the ornate paintings and carvings on the walls, but the oldest sites that we find have no carvings, no art, no hieroglyphics, nothing. They're just almost these sterile recesses, I guess you could call them. Very machine-like, very mechanical, very cold in nature. Not really like something made by humans, possibly. I'm not sure. That's what fascinates me.
Well, I had a very intense Kundalini activation at the Saqqara site one year when I was there, and I actually literally fell down. I couldn't get up, and I had to. I know it sounds bizarre, but I was carried out of there by an old man with a burro who stays at the site, lives at the site. So there is a major Stargate in that location. Are you aware of that?
Not of that specifically, but Egyptologists, again, they try to explain these places as being dynastic constructions, and they're not. So somebody was there a long time before the so-called Egyptians and did all this work. They had high technology. They had mental powers way beyond our capacity, and that's what's so fascinating is that you're really humbled in these places because they can't be explained by conventional Western thought or anything like that. You have to have a very open mind, and be intuitive if you're of that nature, or be with people who are intuitive in order to be able to pick up on exactly what these things are, why they were made, and who made them.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That is has always fascinated me, that particular site. Now, when I went there, someone said that they thought it was a healing place, a place where the ill were taken. This is the above ground portion. Had you ever heard that? Did you have a reaction to that?
Yeah, that's the belief of the Kemet school.
Okay.
And yeah, there's an area which they call the hospital, and it seems that it was used for sound healing, and that's why you have all the faceted angles and things like that there, because the story they say is that the healers who worked there were able to use sound not only for diagnosis but also for healing, and it was the interaction with the stone, with sound interacting with the stone, almost like an MRI functioning, that allowed people to be healed, without the use of what we would call modern technology, ancient techniques of vibration and sound.
Well, what I got when I was at that particular site, not to belabor it too long, there is a pyramid. It's a step pyramid, as I recall, a Saqqara. But this site is sort of alongside of it, kind of to the side of the pyramid, yeah? So,
Yeah.
To me, there's actually two things going on there, two civilizations and two timelines, in a sense. The structure that you're talking about that has the underground portion. It seems to have been built by a culture that was completely different than even the ancient Egyptians, as you were saying, but possibly even different than the ones that might have built things like the Sphinx, for example. In other words, like I said, there's nothing architecturally, in my opinion, that looks even remotely like that. That structure, and I guess you call it the seraphim. And then on the it could have been used for healing at a later date. I almost had the sense that that it had another purpose that we haven't discovered, that was prior to how it was used once they sort of stumbled on it, if you know what I mean. Have there been any tests to deal with sound and see if there were, if the sound bounces off in a certain way, any of that kind of thing?
That's what we definitely are going to start getting into more, is measuring that, emitting sounds with, of course people can vocalize and get interaction, but we'd like to scientifically measure it by producing sounds, finding the frequencies that are in tune with the different structures, because different structures respond to different frequencies. As you notice, the sound response in the King's Chamber is different from the Queen's Chamber and different from the subterranean chamber. So that's the next kind of phase that we definitely want to get into, is see what frequencies react with what sites.
Absolutely. Now, there is one other site that reminds me, or kind of gets evoked anyway. I don't know if there's a link up, and I wonder what you might think about this. Abydos in Egypt is a very distinctive site, and I think also Queen Hatshepsut, however you say her name, her temple. Her architect seems to have wanted to mimic some of this style a bit in her temple, and I do think that they came after what was the original architects of this. But behind the main cat temple, in essence, in Abydos, there, the submerged temple behind there. I forget what they call it. It has a certain name, the submerged portion. that again, architecturally, is completely bizarre. Have you gone there?
Well, it's funny you asked that because when we were there in March, the main group went to Hatshepsut's temple, and three of us were taken by one of the guards of the area who had the keys, and he took us underground. So
Wow.
we actually got to go 50 feet underground, and we went through this tunnel system into these chambers, and it just kept going and going. And when we came back out, we asked him, because he works there, and he's part of the crew cleaning up, etc. How far does it go? And he said it goes under the mountains behind Hatshepsut's temple, and may connect with the Valley of the Queen. So again, we have these subterranean systems of tunnels, and as you rightly point out, the dynastic Egyptians obviously inherited or tried to interpret what these much more ancient things were, and then tried to replicate aspects of them. But that's a very fascinating place. Again, it's like Peru. Most tourists who go to Egypt just see some very basic stuff that they've probably heard about, but when you get to interact with local people, you get to go and see things that are very mind-boggling.
Yeah, actually, I just recalled that they call it the Osiren in Abydos.
The Osirion. Yeah.
Okay. So have you
Yeah.
ever gone? Have you ever seen that? Have you gone there?
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite places. It is so bizarre. It's one of my favorite places.
Now, see, there again, at least for me, when I was there, it doesn't. It's just my interpretation. It doesn't seem to be connected to the temple in front of it. It seems like a completely different group of beings, completely different site, and the other one was built kind of like almost on top of it, or it doesn't cover it, but for all intents and purposes, it dominates it. But it's submerged, and it still has that layer of water. It's a very mysterious place, the Siren. I guess maybe that's not how you pronounce it, but very, very interesting, and I think its secrets have not been revealed. Have you gotten any insights into what you think that was about?
Well, it's it's a very mysterious thing. As you rightly point out, the more famous temple that's in front of it is probably dynastic Egyptian. It's mainly made out of the dynastic stuff is limestone and sandstone, whereas the Osirion is red granite that was brought from Aswan, which is hundreds of miles away. And some of those blocks are, more than 50, maybe 100 tons. And so whoever constructed the Osirion underground brought the stone from hundreds of miles away in order to create it. To me, it has a very cold, mechanical feel to it. I think it was definitely not made as a temple. It's again, that's why I keep going back to Egypt, because these places are, sites like the Osirion are so enigmatic and precisely done, but they don't have the feel of, they don't have a I was built as a temple feel. They feel much more pragmatic and cold and somewhat mechanical in nature.
Right. Yeah, I had sort of a picture of the beings that built the Assyrian when I was there, and I have had lots of past life sort of time travel events around Egypt. So it's always fascinating to me because I get a completely different culture and also physical beings. Actually saw completely different physical beings that were inhabiting that particular site. Now, we have a lot of questions, or some questions that are cropping up in the chat, and I want to see if we can grab some of those and ask you, if you wouldn't mind. I think we're still in our time slot, so I think we still have some time here. So I'm gonna kind of try to grab them, or I am looking at some questions here. I don't even know if there's more than one chat room actually associated with these, because you've got Google Hangouts and you've got YouTube, and it looks like they both have chat rooms. I don't know if they're linked or not. But I see a bunch of questions here in this particular chat room. I'm going to back up and see if there's anything.
Sort of like Khufu.
Right. Okay. Putting on this H construction type of structure, this is a very interesting shape that recurs, from what I understand, at many ancient sites, not just in South America.
Yeah, well, this is the famous Pumapunku, which is part of the Tiwanaku complex in Bolivia. And again, you know, the archaeologists say that a Bronze Age culture did this workmanship, but engineers who I've taken to the site and looked at it say that this is at least 21st century, if not beyond 21st century technology. So there's no way that the native people of 1,000 years ago made these things. They simply found them in place.
Okay. Is there any dating going on? Any ability to date these things?
It is possible. There's a new process called cosmogenic dating or testing, which measures the amount of cosmic radiation that has penetrated the stone. And so we're
and the fact that they call this the jaguar mouth, and when it's on these beings, is quite interesting. And you could extrapolate that the beings that are being depicted came from another dimension.
Well, of course, some people believe that, you know, that these may have been, you know, part African people or part Chinese people or, you know, whatever. The fascinating thing I find about the Olmec is that there's so little that's known about them. You know, so much more is known about the later Maya culture. It's believed by some as well that the famous Mayan calendar was actually the Olmec's calendar that the Maya inherited. But the Olmec seem to appear from nowhere and then disappear, and
yes,
that's why they fascinate me, because it's the same with the Paracas culture. The Paracas suddenly appear on the coast of Peru 3,000 years ago and then disappear 2,000 years ago, and archaeologists have no explanation. So it's my quest to find the answers to this stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I've always found the Olmecs to be a fascinating culture, and
hoping to be able to begin doing testing of stone from some of these sites in the future with a laboratory in the U.S.
That would be amazing. Okay, I have, this is, isn't this an Olmec? This next photograph that I'm going to put on the screen here, isn't that an Olmec?
Yeah. That's I haven't been to Olmec country yet, and I'm going with Hugh Newman in February on a tour. So we're going to be exploring the lands of the Aztec, the Toltec, the Olmec, and the Maya. And, you know, of course, there are examples of these in the museum in Mexico City, but it'll be much more interesting to see them at their original locations.
Absolutely, and they call that the jaguar mouth. Are you aware of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wrote a song a long time ago that we use as the Camelot theme called Jaguar, and they say the jaguar is the door into the other dimensions. The Inca, in other words, you're showing this one, but there are more, right? That would.
Oh, yeah. No, many more. This is a site called Cutimbo, which is in the highlands of Peru, and they're described by archaeologists as being funeral towers. But again, the workmanship is so tight-fitting of this hard stone, it's more likely that the Inca who arrived in the area 1,000 years ago probably discovered them there, and they may have used them as tombs, but whoever made them originally had much higher levels of technology. We did have a number of dowsers at this site, and they felt very strong energy lines relating to these towers.
Right. Well, are you even convinced they're tombs?
No, I think they were built as energetic structures originally, and whoever built them disappeared, and then later the Inca probably may have used them as tombs because they are hollow on the inside, and someone of a royal lineage may have said, "I like that stone tower. When I die, bury me inside of it."
What is this photo of here? This.
This is one of the megalithic sites in Peru called Ollantaytambo, and it's an example of some of the workmanship in granite that the famous Inca could not have made this because they only had bronze tools, and that's kind of what ties Egypt in with Peru is that, of course, Egyptologists will say that everything in Egypt was done by the dynastic Egyptians, who were a Bronze Age culture, and everything in Peru that's of stone like this was done by the Inca, but clearly that's not possible, so we're looking at structures that are far, far older than the Inca, and in Egypt far, far older than the dynastic Egyptians.
Right. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I imagine there are other places in